Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. What I thought would be useful this afternoon is to give you a sense of the scale, form and nature of the Games in the context of the Transportation Challenge. What that means in terms of the transportation challenges themselves, the strategies we're adopting to meet those challenges, and then how we're getting on in terms of progress towards delivering the transport for the Games. In terms of the Games themselves, Wilburn's touched on this in greater length. The real issue for us is the sheer scale of the Games themselves. The sheer magnitude of it and the fact it is across the nation creates the first big transport challenge. Secondly, it is a dispersed theatre of operations. Most people think it's just Stratford. The reality is that whilst that is the heart of the Games, and on a busy day we'll have some 300,000 people turning up, we have the other venues. So all the River Zone venues there, including 5 competition venues in Excel. We have the venues in the centre of town, using many of the iconic features of London. We then have the venues slightly further dispersed, Wembley, Wimbledon, Eton Dorney, Broxbourne, and then the national venues themselves, whether that be Eton Dorney, the mountain biking, Weymouth and Portland, or the football venues. All those will require transportation, and not just transportation over a Saturday afternoon or a weekend. It is an entire summer of competition that needs to be supported. And when we've wrapped up everything for the Olympic Games, we take a brief breather, and they're off and running again for the Paralympic Games. So it's a sustained effort throughout the whole of the summer, and that brings its challenge. There are 4 challenges for us. The first one is we have to get everyone where they need to be on time. Whether that be one of Wilburn's athletes, a spectator, a member of the workforce, we have to get them there on time. Secondly, we've got to do that without bringing London to a halt or the UK to a halt. Life will be different. Life in many ways will be unusual, but we've got to sustain the economy during that period of that summer of 2012. Thirdly, we've got to leave behind a legacy not just in the transport infrastructure we've built for the Games and along with the competition venues, but a way that people think about travelling to and from sporting and cultural events. And lastly, we've got to be very mindful of the cost. We're in the public sector, every pound has to count and get maximum bang per buck. Now, we have deploying 4 strategies in terms of transportation for the Games. And the first one we're unabashed about. We will focus like maniacs on the needs of the athletes to get Wilburn's client groups where they need to be to sustain the operation of the Games. If we fail them, and it has happened in previous Games, when the athletes will not get to compete, we cannot have a repeat of Steve Redgrave stealing cars, Tessa Sanderson warming up by running up and down the centre of her coach to warm up and then throw her javelin to get gold medal. Thirdly, we want to make it inclusive Games, and by inclusive we mean that everyone, whether you've got sensory or physical impairment, we will get you through transportation to where you need to be, using a combination of road and rail systems. And lastly, we want to make it a sustainable Games. Sustainable in the sense of a Games that gets the best off the existing transport systems wherever possible. Where there is a long-term legacy, we'll invest in a transport upgrade, some £6.5 billion. And where there isn't, we'll develop a temporary solution to get that peak of the peak and manage it out during that 16-day period. For the spectators, the numbers of spectators varies considerably from day to day of the Games. In the 2 days leading up to the opening ceremony, you have the football competition starting up across the nation. Day 0, Friday, July the 27th, 2012, opening ceremony. From a transport perspective, actually relatively a doddle, because you've only got 1 venue in operation for the evening, and that's known as the main stadium. Getting it wrong is very embarrassing, however. And from then on, you start to peak fairly rapidly. On a good day across the nation, we're talking about 1 million ticketed spectators to the sports events, and probably a similar number to the cultural events that will be going alongside that. And Rich will touch more on that. In terms of competition venues in Stratford, first week up to day 6, relatively easy because the main stadium isn't in operation. But from then on, the Friday, day 7, through to the back end of the Games, gets very, very exciting there, as upwards of 300,000 spectators go through the sports events when the main stadium comes into operation, along with the rest of the venues there. So it's very variable about where the events are and the duration. The actual numbers of events vary significantly as well. So some competition venues will have 1 session a day, some will run up to 4 sessions a day. Some events will start at 8:30 in the morning, some will finish at 12 o'clock at night. And what that means is you're having to run your transportation systems very heavily for that period, but it also means there's a huge commercial opportunity because it's an entire long day in which to tackle and serve customers. The majority of spectators obviously will be going to the Olympic Park. Something like 25% of spectators' tickets will go to the park. But nevertheless, there are huge quantities going to Excel, Wembley, Earls Court, and out west at Eton Dorney, 10 sessions over 10 days of 30,000 people. So it varies considerably from venue to venue. In a national context, some 70% of tickets will be for sports events in London. The remaining 30% will be across venues across the whole of the UK, including football, sailing and such like. So it is very much a games for the nation in that sense. From a transportation design, we need to understand where the tickets are going to be sold and where people are going to be travelling and on what days. The majority of tickets will be sold the closer you are to a venue. Pretty obvious in many senses, the closer you are, the more likely you are to buy tickets. And this diagram here shows the majority of tickets will go to London and south and southeast and east of the nation. Nevertheless, you get considerable numbers sold elsewhere across the UK. And what that means is the largest number will actually travel up to London before the games, stay over with friends and relatives. So in terms of on-the-day travel, you've got a huge preponderance within London and the southeast. A lot of people coming for day trips on that particular day itself, and that's for London itself. Conversely, you've still got flows going off to all the other sports events across the whole of the nation, so very much a huge transport operation. The key destination for many of them will be the Olympic Park itself. A great advantage for us is it's the best connected park in Olympic history. 10 rail lines serve it through three stations, with trains arriving roughly every 13 seconds by the time we push the services up on all those 10 lines themselves. Now, 80% of spectators will travel by rail. The remaining 20% will come through two transport malls, to the south and to the north of the park. And they hold facilities for a number of groups. People with blue badge parking needs, walking and cycling, direct coach, and park and ride systems that we're putting in for games operation purposes itself. One of the tricks we're pulling off is we're stealing, temporarily, I'd add, for 16 days and borrowing them, the new high-speed trains that are being delivered for the South Eastern Trains franchise. We'll borrow them, bolt them together to make big 12-car consists, and for those 16 days we'll fire them eastbound from St Pancras towards the park. Our record is 6 minutes 45 second run time to the park. Those trains will then swing down into Kent and reverse from both Ebbsfleet and Ashford for their reverse journey themselves. However, in the context of the park, the reality is that these will only ever carry 10% of the total spectator load. The reality is that you can do Stratford to Liverpool Street in 7 minutes anyway. So whilst it's glamorous and it will help win us the bid, it will not be the heavy horse, as it were, of the games. The river zones, very heavy usage of mainline rail to the south of the river, then Excel being served by Docklands Light Railway. Some £700 million has been invested in upgrading and extending the Docklands Light Railway, including new rail carriages serving both Excel, City Airport and further up through to the Olympic Park itself. Jubilee Line upgrade supporting the dome there, which hosts some of the sporting events, including the finals of the basketball. River can only play a big part for the three venues in the maritime area. So Greenwich, we expect about 7% mode share by river, and then dropping off a bit to about 5% for the dome and about 3% to the Royal Artillery Barracks supporting the shooting. In the centre of town, using the mainline rail systems there, people walking from those stations to the sports events. London's underground stations, 15 in the centre, they're very useful, and then many of the bus routes. So in many ways, much of the easy area for us. Moving forward, we've been driving hard on the transport plan for the Games. We've published the second edition of that. It's gone out for consultation, and the final version of that will be published later this year. And that gives details of all the competition venues, the venue transport strategies, and the more detail behind this. And for those who are interested, it's readily accessible off the website and gives you a better view of what we're doing. Heavy rail will play a key part for the games for us, in the sense that we're going to be moving up to 25% of the spectators through the rail systems. We've got to do something very different with them in terms of boosting the level of service during the day itself, running the service out later at night, allowing people very much to get back across the whole of the nation itself. We've already agreed the commercial heads of terms with all the train operating companies, and we've worked hard with other organisations such as Crossrail and Thameslink to ensure their projects work effectively with us. In total, we've invested £25 million upgrading the walking and cycling to all the competition venues across the nation. That's important to us because some 4 million people live within 40 minutes push bike distance of a competition venue. And if we can get them onto their bikes, it means it alleviates demand on the public transport systems, but it also leaves behind a sustainable and healthy legacy. So it's important for us. And most of those schemes will complete over the next 12 months at the same time as we complete the main competition venues. The river services I touched on just now will never compete with, for example, the Jubilee line in terms of the mass movement of people. Nevertheless, they will provide a good extra over transport capacity and a pleasurable one for those people who are taking their families up to Waterloo from Woking or wherever. They can then get on a riverboat, go down to the Greenwich for watching the equestrian events, and then travel gently back home again. Very much a part of an experience in a day out in London. We've invested heavily in the piers for that. Across the nation itself, we want to give people many opportunities to travel. And there are bits of the network, in terms of the rail network, that don't serve the nation particularly effectively or will be very crowded. And for us, therefore, we've created a network of coaches across the nation. And the first group have now been appointed to run our direct coach systems across the nation, but also those supporting the park and ride sites. The park and ride sites come in two forms. There's the strategic park and ride sites, which we're creating around the periphery of London, around the M25, but then many of the local park and ride sites supporting the events outside London. So, for example, Weymouth and Portland, Eton Dorney, Broxbourne, Hadley Farm and such like. All competition venues will require upgrades of the local bus networks, either taking existing routes and uplifting them or putting in extra bus shuttles between railheads, for example. We're working with Transport for London, and later this year we'll complete the procurement on those sorts of bus services with TfL and the other road operators outside the UK, outside of London. Two areas we're focusing on to manage effectively in terms of stakeholder groups. Road freight is important to the operation of London, and therefore we've worked with the FTA and Road Haulage Association to create a road freight liaison group, working with them to look at how we recast deliveries. What's the art of the possible? Can we leave a different and long-term legacy behind? Can we alleviate the road system, get maximum road capability during games time itself? Second group we've worked with, the taxi and licensed private hire. 22,000 black cabs in London are highly accessible, and we need to use those for games operation purposes, and that group is already working effectively such that we will be able during games time to give them enough information to work effectively with us through the 24-hour cycle each day. Talked earlier about inclusiveness. The accessible transport strategy we launched some 18 months ago is important to us. It defines a series of combined modes of transport. We can't do up the entirety of the underground prior to games time, but we can use their accessible stations plus road systems to provide a network of accessibility during the games, and that's well underway today. As far as the business community is concerned, Mike in many ways touched on our experiences to date through the ODA about how we've been in procurement. Going forward, working with yourselves and others across the UK, it'll be very important. We've still got about £1 billion worth of procurement to go ahead, and from a transportation perspective, we need large amounts of overlay to make all our depots, the park and ride systems, and everything else come together during that period of the games. One of the elements for us to help, we've got to help, is put in place the Olympic and Paralympic route networks. They're an essential part of the bid, and they're an essential part of the Games operation itself. Basically, the road networks for the Games will need to be adjusted and tweaked to ensure that Wilburn get his vehicles where they need to be on time. Those network of roads have now been designated through a statutory instrument, and over the next 12 months we'll be applying for the relevant traffic regulation orders and the technical bits and pieces that are necessary to make that road system come into fruition during the Games operation itself. Now, the majority of the road network will not be readily discernible to the general person in the street. It's only about 2% of London's roads, and of that, only about 0.5% is really heavily trafficked, and that's in the core section of town where we've got to move very large numbers of athletes from the park to the competition venues in the West End, and then further afield up to Wembley. Off that prime network, we'll need alternative routes just in case something bad happens, and then we need to be able to support the training venues as the athletes work from the middle of July onwards. To summarise, it doesn't get bigger than this. It's a huge challenge, but a huge opportunity. And for us looking forward, those opportunities are twofold. There's the immediate business opportunity that it presents to yourselves and your brothers and sisters across the whole of the nation. But I think it provides a wider opportunity. It provides an opportunity to sell transportation and public transport for the Games, to leave behind a higher mode share and to change the way people think about travelling to sports and cultural events. And in the wider context still, it's our opportunity to change the world and leave behind a better place for which we, more importantly, our grandchildren can be proud. Thank you for your attention.